Viltrox 85mm f1.4 Pro Lens Review. Basic features. The Viltrox 85mm f1.4 Pro is an 800-gram beast of a bokeh monster lens, available for Nikon Z and Sony E-mounts. It's a solid hunk of glass, metal build, metal mount, and some weather sealing. On the barrel, we've got a lens button, AF/MF switch, and, the coolest part of all, an aperture ring. Moreover, there's a declick switch for the aperture ring so that you can operate this lens on your covert spy missions. Finally, there's a focus-by-wire focusing ring. Sharpness. Here's a test chart taken at near minimum focus distance. I took crops from the center, mid-frame, and corners. And here are the results. At f1.4, it starts out a little soft, but keep in mind that in the real world, it's more than sharp enough for portraits. I never once found the sharpness lacking in practice. It sharpens up quickly by reaching a peak at around f4 for the center. The corners are pretty good too at f4, and at f5.6, the sharpness is very good across the frame. Here's a graph summarizing the contrast rapidity change, which is a rough measure of sharpness. I noticed that there was a slight amount of field curvature at close focusing, so at longer distances, the mid-frames and corners should look even better. Conclusion. This lens is very sharp. No concerns. Bokeh. Even more important than sharpness, in my opinion, is bokeh. How is the bokeh of this lens? Let's do a detailed analysis looking at 3 categories. For reference, I've also included the bokeh of the Nikon 50mm f1.8G for the Nikon F mount. The first category is the stopped down performance at f2.8. With 11 aperture blades, the stop-down performance of the Viltrox looks great and nearly circular. The only downside I see here is the slightly sharp pointed edges. I give it 3.5 out of 4, where 4 would be absolutely perfect. Second category, out of focus foreground, wide open. When it comes to the wide open performance, I'm going to give 3 ratings. The first is edge performance. How soft is the edge? I'm rating on a scale out of 5, where 5 is soft and unobtrusive. I give the Viltrox 3 out of 5, which is a good score. The edge isn't as soft as it could be, and it seems a little harsher than the Nikon. The next is chromatic aberrations. Since the more chromatic aberrations, the more busy the bokeh. There's just a very slight amount here, so I'm giving it 4 out of 5. Finally, what about the inner circle? On some lenses, you'll see a bit of tree trunk ring structure in the bokeh, whereas on others like the Nikon, it's fairly smooth. It looks almost invisible to me, but I can see a slight texture, so I give it 4.5 out of 5. Finally, the third category is the out-of-focus background wide open. The out-of-focus background wide open is arguably the most important part of bokeh. And here, you can see the lens was optimized for the out-of-focus background because the bokeh circles are even softer than the circles on the out-of-focus foreground. For the edge performance, I'll give it 4.5 out of 5. It has a similar amount of chromatic aberrations as the out-of-focus foreground, so it's also getting 4 out of 5. But the inner texture is a bit more busy here, and in the stronger highlights, it's quite noticeable, so I'll give it 2 out of 5. How can we make sense of all this? Well, after careful tuning, I've developed a weighted formula to compute an overall bokeh score that gives the most preference to the edge performance wide open and the most preference to the out-of-focus background in the bokeh. Using this formula, the Viltrox 85mm f1.4 Pro gets an overall score of 79.8%, a very good score. Generally speaking, any lens which can score better than 60% has decent bokeh, and anything that scores over 75% has very nice bokeh. Indeed, I thought the bokeh of this lens in actual shooting conditions was very good. I was rarely distracted by the bokeh in difficult conditions, and I really think there's very little to complain about. General thoughts. After my birding lenses, this is one of my new favorite lenses to shoot with. It's got great image quality, and it's more affordable than the first-party 85mm f1.4 lenses. The aperture ring is a nice touch as well. There are only 2 things that could possibly use improvements. First, while the autofocus motor is fast and works well, about 5% of the time it jitters and loses focus. I never had a serious problem with it, but I felt that it could be a little bit more solid and secure. And although I don't have any reason to really be afraid of it, when the camera is off, one of the autofocus motor components is loose in the lens. So when you move the lens around, the component slides inside the lens. Viltrox tells me this is completely normal, but it's a little disconcerting. Overall, I think that the Viltrox 85mm f1.4 Pro lens is a great value if you're looking for a portrait and longer landscape lens for the Nikon Z or Sony E system, and I highly recommend it. I hope you enjoyed this review, and I'll see you again next time.